turn this on?
No, it's already set.
Sorry, Tim. Hi. Oh, look at that, so loud. Welcome, everyone. This is my first Forbes Collective event. I'm so excited to be here, mostly because there's food involved. Yes. I know. I love that we're having a potluck, right? It's like your aunties are bringing the ambrosia salad and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But you know, Forbes Collective is all about bringing employees together, creating a community. And it's fitting that we have our special guest tonight, who is all about uplifting communities and binding communities through food. Now, you've probably seen her kind of walking around. She's super cute. And she's not just cute, she's a James Beard Award-winning chef. She's an entrepreneur, she's an activist, she's a fungi advocate. But she's also the host of Counterspace. And it's a show about food and culture, and she's just an all-around force of nature. So please help me welcome Sophia Roe. Sophia! She coming out? I told her she should, slow walk.
I'm coming out, I'm here.
Does this work?
Excuse me while I try to get up here. I know, right?
Do you want me to sit there?
I think they're both up. Wait, look here. Okay.
No, but I feel like he's up.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Well, thank you for being here tonight.
Are you kidding? It's a thrill.
And you're staying for the potluck after.
I'm staying for the potluck. I didn't know there was a potluck. I feel like I should have brought food. I'm so sorry that I didn't.
And she's not gonna judge your food.
Oh, yeah, I'm not a chef. I'm not a chef.
No.
I'm a chef, but I'm not a chef.
Well, speaking about that, I'd love for everyone to know a little bit more about the Sophia Roe that we see today. What are your life experiences that brought you here and sort of influence who you fight for and what you fight for?
That's such a good question. Okay, so I'm a very loquacious person, so I'm gonna be chatty. All right, I want to there's something in me that wants to apologize for that, but I guess you're here to listen to me talk. So I grew up in kind of all over Florida. I grew up kind of in and out of foster care. Both my parents were substance abusers. My dad died before I could meet him, and my mother is still a substance abuser. So I'm the oldest of four, and so we were all just very much raised in the system, you know? And I think because of that, I was deeply impacted by hunger. And I think that's something that we don't talk about when we talk about foster care reform, when we talk about anything advocacy. We use terms like food insecure, food deserts, and food swamps. Really, those are just catch-all phrases for hungry, right? I grew up very much experiencing hunger. I mean, I have distinct memories, Joyce, of being in a group home and literally fighting over for 8 people, a box of Hamburger Helper. You know what I mean? I distinctly remember that. In terms of food and how I got into food, it definitely was not part of the plan. It was more I worked really hard in school because everybody kept telling me that was the only way I was ever gonna get out of the system, and I believed them. So I worked really hard. I got into college, but again, I had no parents. I had a lot of caseworkers, but I didn't really have directions. I didn't know how to be in school, you know? Okay, I have class tomorrow, but I don't have a car, I don't have a bicycle, how am I gonna get there, you know? So I dropped out and was I just need to get a job. I like to say it was I was just in survival mode. I was not even considering the idea of thriving, and I'd certainly never seen anyone thrive. So the benefit here was I was really a fearless 18-year-old. I was not scared of anybody saying no to me. I was not scared to look stupid. I wasn't scared to it's so funny when I hear some people talk about their high school experiences of being scared of repeat outfits or what a guy was gonna say. I'm I didn't think about that at all. I was not thinking about that at all. And I was definitely made fun of, but it's just not something that I considered because I was always just kind of thinking survival. So there was this Vietnamese restaurant on the corner of Colonial and Bumby in Orlando, Florida that was hiring. And it's no longer open, but they were hiring, and I lied. I was like, they were like, do you have knife skills? I was like, you don't even know. I got tons of knife skills, 0 knife skills. But they hired me. They found out that I had 0 knife skills, and they were probably yelling, like, they were probably cussing at me in Vietnamese. I don't know. But I did learn how to have a family. And what I mean is, like, family in terms of, like, structure. I understood. That's where I learned, like, there's a boss, right? And you have to listen to what they say, and you have to be on time. And I never really got those things, certainly not from the people that were supposed to care about me most, right? Like your parents. And so I fell in love with it. I thought, this is so cool, you know? And I get to eat as much as I want. I never had that before, right? So that was the beginning. I was 19 years old. I'm 34 now, so cooking is the only thing I've ever done. I say all the time, I think it's the only thing that I definitely for sure know that I can do. I had no plans of being on TV. In fact, I never saw anyone that looked like me on TV. I thought Ina Garten was the coolest thing ever. I still think Ina Garten's the coolest thing ever. I'm happy to lose an Emmy to her any day, which I have twice now. But, you know, I just never even considered TV for myself. And so from there, I worked in a lot of different restaurants, front of the house and back of house. I literally hustled. I literally worked wherever that I could. There were many times in my life that I had jobs, but I didn't have a home to live in because I couldn't afford down payments and, you know, first and last and security and all that. So definitely lived in a car for 4 months. It was me and a dog, which is really a time. And it was a car that was about to get repossessed. I remember, like, kind of parking it in a different area every night, kind of like running from repo men. But again, like, it's so weird, Joyce. Like, I don't really remember being, like, scared, you know? I just remember being like, this is it. This is my life. I have to, like, hustle. I have to figure it out. That's not to say I wasn't sad or depressed, but I had no one to call on, you know? So eventually people are like, you should get into private chefing. You're going to make great money. So I found these really great clients. Gary and Isis Jones, they were the president and vice president of Full Sail University in Winter Park, Florida. And they came into one of the restaurants I worked in one night, and they wanted to see the chef. And my boss, Joe, wasn't there. So I was like, well, I'll go out and I'll just say something to them. So I go out and I'm like, hey, I'm Sophia, I'm glad you enjoy the food. And they were like, we really want to have someone that makes food for us at home. And I was like, I don't even know. Well, I don't know, I can't help you with that, but you can come here every night if you want. And they were like, no, we want to hire you to be our chef. And I'd never even heard of that. But I was like, oh, okay, that sounds kind of cool. They paid me really, really well. I'd never seen that much money in my life. And so I learned about that industry, like working for a person. And then I really wanted to develop my culinary skills more. So I was like, I kind of want to go to culinary school. Can I not do this and go to culinary school? And they were like, you're 5 years old, of course, go. So I went to culinary school, and I was really depressed. I went to California because I was scared of New York weather. If I could do it again, I went to CIA in St. Helena, north of San Francisco. And that makes sense to go to school there if you're like a wine person, right? I didn't really realize that. I was really just a scared of winter person. So anyway, I go to culinary school there. I drop out. I start doing a bunch of stages, right? Which is like an apprenticeship in a restaurant. And I was told frequently, don't tell anyone how old you are. Don't talk. You know, like it was very much like, you're very lucky to be here. You're black, you're a woman, and you don't do pastry. I did not do pastry. I was very like, I don't want to do pastry. I want to be a line cook. I want to be a sous. I want to be a garde manger, whatever. So I did that a ton. I moved back to Miami. I worked in a lot of different restaurants there. And then I got this opportunity to move to New York. And I always thought I would go to New York, but I didn't think I was a good enough chef to make it in New York. I just didn't think I was.
Is it because you didn't see people that look like you in these kitchens?
I think it was because, well, it was that. I think I was just like imposter syndrome. Like certain types of people live and work in New York as chefs. You got to remember, this was back when it wasn't sexy to be a chef. There was no Instagram. This is 2010, right? It's not a sexy thing. This is back when if you brought a cell phone into a kitchen, you would be fired on site. You were stealing R&D and you were taking it to another kitchen. Why do you have your phone in here? You know, it's just a different time. So I ended up moving here, and it was with this family. I still under NDA, so I can't tell you who it was, but they were a wealthy family, and they only wanted me part-time. So I was like, okay, so I'll work at 11 Martison Park a little bit, and then, which I learned a lot. hot apps. I was a saucier when I was there, which I loved because I didn't really want to be like a line cook there because it's so intense. But I wanted to get tighter. And I don't know how to like describe that to. I just wanted my skills sharper, you know. And I just felt like as a line cook, I wasn't interested in those skills. I wanted my flavors good. I wanted my R&D really good. So I did that. I worked at Per Se before they did lunch service.
It's all been downhill since then.
Yeah, now they do. It's different now. But no, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I loved fine dining. I just thought, well, this is so cool. But when to your question, it's like, you know, when you're working in these restaurants and you see nobody that looks like you, but second, and maybe the most important, you're not feeding anybody that looks like you, right? You're feeding these people who have all this money, and it's great. You're thrilled. But working in a restaurant, you're really disconnected from your guests, you know? I don't get to see you. Front of the house does, but like, I want to see you, you know? Cooking is interesting. It's like, it's the only art that you like really hope disappears, you know? Like you hope when you send it out that it doesn't come back, you know? Like you don't want to see it again. So doing that was really great. I loved being a restaurant cook. It was thrilling. And then I got really burnt out. I decided to not be a restaurant cook anymore, to be a private chef. You do the Hamptons, you do Memorial Day to Labor Day, you know, and it's like the day in the life of being a Hampton chef is a lie. That's not real. That's like not real. Like I love that every time I see those TikToks, I'm like, this is literally bullshit. The day in the life of it being a Hampton chef is like Star Jones yelling about cocktail shrimp, and like people are mad because there's not enough, caviar, and I'm like, I bought all the caviar they have. Like I don't know, you know. So it was just you're literally service. You know, you're working for people. Like 5-year-olds are yelling at you because they don't have balsamic on their strawberries. You know what I'm saying? It's like very much like you are a servant. So from there, I was like, I'm just gonna be freelance. I'm gonna do my own thing. I'm just gonna figure out a way to like do my own thing, which pivoted me to working at a makeup company for a little while.
Wait, what did you do at a makeup company? I didn't know about this.
Isn't that crazy? I know, I didn't tell you about this. So I'm gonna speed it up because I don't want to talk forever. But it's just such a weird story. But it's an important part of my story. So I didn't do anything. I literally quit. Trump had just become president. I was having like a meltdown, you guys. It was 2016. It was just a weird time, especially for New York. So I'm not going to do food. I'm going to get away from it. I'm still in my 20s, but I've literally worked for people, fed people this whole time. And then I had a friend that was like, Milk Makeup's doing a casting. And I was like, okay, like, what does that mean? She's like, I don't know, like, you're cool, you should go. So I go, and there's just it's a sea of like beautiful people. And I was like, okay, well, I'm leaving, because no. And this woman walks up to me and she's like, I think you're on the short list. And I was like, ooh, I like a short list. Okay, I'll be on that. So basically, the job wasn't right for me, but I got all the way to the last round, like the screen test, and I got to meet Georgie, who was one of the founders. And before you know it, we're talking about like eczema and like breast milk and like all this weird stuff, which I'm sure by this point you're like, that doesn't surprise me, this girl's a total weirdo. But it was great, you know. She followed me on Instagram, and she's like, I like the way that you can talk about food. You really can talk about all the different processes of it, because I really know how to, like, I can do a full dissertation on the difference between, like, steak tartare and a ribeye. Like, let's go. You know what I mean? That Maillard reaction, like, let's talk about it. But she liked that I could do that, and they were about to take the company vegan. And so she's like, we really want to talk about the food-based stuff. And if you think about it, like making makeup is no different than making food. It's really just a process, you know? So I was like, okay, this is Snapchat era, right? This is like, there's no Instagram stories yet, you know? They wanted to start building out their social media. And she's like, you're funny. You could be funny on camera. So I was like, okay, I guess I can do that. I have no idea how to do that. I'm 27 years old. I have no clue. I've never worked at a desk job. So they hire me to be partly in social media, which is this is a new department. The social media department was me, you know, and to be in creative. So I remember the first day, this girl, Farrah Marcus, she walks me through the company. She's like, well, why don't you CC me and all of us on an email? And I looked at her and I go, what is a CC? What is that? And she's like, you know, like an email. And I was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I had never worked in a company. And she's like, okay, wow, you're literally like not qualified for this job. And I was like, yeah, I know, don't tell anyone. Like, I don't know. So anyway, that's where I learned how to be on camera. That's where I learned how to take really great photos. It's where I learned how to build really strong decks. It's where I learned how to do that. So that's what gave me the sort of feeling of like, I can do something else. And I remember one day this girl, Valentina, was like, you suck at this job. Like, you're a chef. Like, just go be a chef. And I was like, am I still a chef? Like, I felt like, oh my God, I'm not a chef anymore. But what's funny is the woman who's now my manager, she happened to be watching what would launch as the Instagram story. She happened to be watching the Milk Makeup Instagram story, and she saw me on it. And she thought I was funny, so she sent me an email, cold email. She's like, hi, I'm Marissa. And I was like, hi, Michelle. Like, that's how bad I was at emails. Like, I couldn't even get anyone's names right. She's like, I want to take you out to lunch. And I was like, all right, take me out to lunch. I love a free lunch. I make $20K a year. Okay, let's do it. So she takes me out to lunch, tells me she wants to be my manager. I don't recommend anyone doing this, but I was like, my manager for what? She's like, like, for like your career. Like, you could have a career. You can like talk and food. And I was like, okay. Anyway, signed a contract. All right, what? Signed a contract. And then, so I quit. And then I remember she brought me this job. There was this job with Club Monaco. They wanted me to speak publicly about my life. And I was like, well, what else do I do? And she's like, you do that. You just speak. You're going to do a panel and you're going to speak. And they're going to pay you like $500. I was like, they're going to pay me what? I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. This was like in 2018. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I'm rich, for $500. But I did that, and that was history. And then before that, I was doing events. I was public speaking, and then the pandemic happened. And once the pandemic happened, I literally thought my life is over, because my whole life was like making food for people, doing events, speaking to people. And then the pandemic happened, and I became addicted to my phone, just like all of you.
I think with Counterspace, your show, you like really found your sweet spot, where it's about sharing stories,
Yeah.
bridging gaps with generational gaps, language gaps with food.
Yeah.
And we're here to talk about food and how we can help uplift a community. Like, what are some of your favorite experiences or stories from Counterspace that kind of exhibit that express that?
Every single one. I knew that my entire career that I was making food for people that I just did not relate to. It was really it was very bizarre. And knowing the truths about food, growing up in Florida, but being, I had free lunch, just like all the kids that were poor did, seeing boxes of oranges that are like product of Dominican Republic. And you're like, we live in Florida. Like, there's an orange grove, like, there's oranges in the air, like Florida's responsible for the nation's volume of citrus, Like, I knew that from a young age, I was a really curious kid, and I really always considered, like, where does this come from? Like, what is the story behind why we eat a certain specific thing? And the pandemic was incredible for me, because it really highlighted these problems and these issues. That was a time where people were doing sourdough and recipes, but also it was like kind of dangerous for me to like do a video with all these ingredients and then tell you guys, go buy tahini. I'm not going to tell you guys to go out into the store when you don't need to go out into the store, or when you literally are being mandated and told like not to do so. So for me, it was just like, wait, this is really exposing some things. It never felt like a more important time for food to be news, Food, every single animal on the planet needs food. It actually was so bizarre to me. I remember, so Vice had already had this concept for the show. They didn't have a host. They weren't sure how it was going to, they were just doing news packages. But the problem is just kind of felt too newsy, kind of felt too clinical. And they really wanted a host that could kind of just like get into the nitty gritty. So when they reached out to me like as a host. And then we took one call with Moral, who's the vice president, and was like, she's like, oh, no, Soph, you can do this, But I was like, okay, well, then I want to be a producer, because you guys don't know the stories that you necessarily need to be telling, right? We need to be hearing, like, if we're going to talk about food, let's talk about prison food. Let's talk about eating insects. 3 billion people globally already do, right? Let's talk about eating disorders, right? This idea that everybody gets joy out of food is a lie. Not everybody does. Let's talk about protest food, right? So it's like that's in TV, they call it stand and stir, right? Hey guys, so today we're gonna make an entree, an appetizer, and you guys don't even eat like that. When you make dinner tonight or tomorrow, because we have dinner for you, you're not gonna, you make yourself an appetizer? You don't do that. You do a salad course for yourself? Are you kidding? Who are you? if you do that. You know what I mean? It just didn't feel like we were really going to capture an audience if we didn't make a big portion of the show like storytelling. You know, when I sit down and speak to an Uyghur woman who's talking to me about how her grandmother was kidnapped, essentially kidnapped by the Chinese government, right? That is a story that I couldn't have even imagined having someone tell that story in front of me, but then also for this woman to then share with me like her joys of black vinegar and noodle pulling right at the same time. And you see this as she's telling me the story about her grandmother, then she starts talking about food and you can see her kind of elevate, you can see her mood very much literally just come alive,
I love that episode because I think
Same.
it also speaks to the immigrant experience in food and about how you come to America and what's the first thing you do? You look for the grocery store that sells the adobo or the salted fish that you cook with.
Oh, don't even get me going on adobo. Jesus. Adobo. It's like cultural erasure by proxy of powder, It's but if you talk to a Puerto Rican person, they'll tell you that adobo is so quintessentially Puerto Rican. And I'm like, oh.
It's quintessentially Filipino too, because of the Spanish colonialism, which you talk about as well when you talk about these difficult subjects like disordered eating, colonization, and food. Yeah. It's like the show is it's protest in itself.
I mean, the first season was really the most depressing because we made a show in 2020, no vaccine. I'm the only one without a mask on. It was also funny. I remember I said I wanted to do an episode on mushrooms, and Vice was like, no. Vice was like, no. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, it's a food show, and drugs. And I'm like, okay, mushrooms are delicious. And they're not all psychedelic, right? What are you talking about? So we fought so hard to do that episode, and now doesn't that seem ridiculous? Mushrooms are everywhere, right? They're everywhere. Somebody in here has something with a mushroom on it, If not you guys, then I definitely have most mushroom tattoos, but, it just seems so silly. But when we did the second season, they were like, okay, we trust you. So, we got it, And that's when we start having what I consider more hopeful conversations. However, also, the intersection is ooh, I got to check my own microaggression conversations. When we start having conversations about...
What do you mean?
Who gets to make what? Okay, set the scene for you guys. You're told this is the most killer Japanese food in New York. You walk in and every single Japanese chef behind the counter is black. Is that good? Is that bad? Right? Is it not authentic? Is it authentic? Who gets to make what, right? And then what I check you guys on is the idea that black people can be Japanese because Japanese is a nationality and black is a race. But these are the things we don't consider. These are the things we're not thinking about. There are more than 3 million black people that live in Japan. My grandmother was 100% Japanese, right? So it's we just considering who gets to make what. We had Marcus Samuelsson on that episode, who was adopted, who is a black man, but very much 100% raised in Sweden, right? You cannot tell that man that nasty, weird, tubed Swedish fish is not delicious and part of his culture. You know what I mean? He makes me taste it on camera, and it was tastes like cat food. I was like, what is this? But he loves it, because he was raised in Sweden. So we have these really interesting conversations that I don't think people are considering. From a storyteller's perspective, right? Okay, let me think about the black experience in Japan, which, by the way, intense, But separate from that, Chinatowns, right? There's 9 Chinatowns in New York. So many people don't even know that, right? Why are there 9 Chinatowns in New York, Who invented a Chinatown? What are they for, Chinatowns are invented because of racism, point blank, period.
So that's an episode I think we're going to view tonight, your Chinatown episode.
Such a great episode. I love that episode.
Why?
Well, first off, I love Jenny because she's so funny.
You're a co-host that day, right?
Yeah, she's just the best. She just considers that the number one thing is Asia's just this catch-all.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating because that's Asia, Asian food. What is that? There's Laotian food, there's Malaysians, there's Filipino, there's Thai, there's Korean. Also, even just China, right? There are thousands of different types of food just in China, you know? And so, you know, where you're here, you're like, oh, what am I in the mood for? I'm in the mood for Ethiopian. I'm in the mood for Chinese food. What does that mean? You know, when we lose stories, then things just become like this just vast sort of like gray area, you know? And that's upsetting because then that makes those people a gray area. Then that makes those stories a gray area. Then that makes those resources a gray area.
And what happens to that community, right? Like when those stories are told by someone else.
I mean, they completely disappear. They become nothing, right? And like I said before, it becomes the resources, they're gone, right? The ecological labor of food that comes from that place, gone, you know? I worked on a show last year. It's called What Am I Eating? It came out yesterday, Zooey Deschanel. And we did this episode on chocolate. I was honored to be able to do my segment on chocolate because chocolate is so ubiquitous, especially here in America. There was a study I was telling you done in the 70s, 1,000 children under the age of 3, right? And it was a pretty simple study. They just have to be able to basically like label 10 things: tomato, banana, car, right? The only thing that 100% of the 1,000 children that are under the age of 3 were able to identify was a piece of chocolate. But chocolate doesn't grow here. It grows a little bit in South Florida and a teeny bit in Hawaii. That's it, right? 60% of the food that we eat here comes from somewhere else. That's 60% of the stories. That's 60% of the labor. That's 60% of the humans. That's 60% of the ecological, the earthly labor. All of that comes from somewhere else. So when you say to me, like, what happens to those people when someone else tells their story? I'm like, it's like they never existed, which is why so many of us don't know anything about where our food comes from, and it's not our fault, you know. And on our quest to get to know the origin stories and where the foods come from, we have to be prepared to be devastated or disappointed. We talked with Michael Twitty about this. Yeah. And that was a really emotional episode for me because he talks about fighting racism through origin stories of food. Really, really emotional episode. It doesn't play like it's emotional, but I definitely cried quite a bit during like the taping of that, you know?
Well, you talked about the first season of Counterspace being a dark place for you.
It was very dark, yes. Very, very dark. That was like a man is telling you he was, you know, kidnapped, and then I have to like end the interview and like go to work, you know, because like work isn't over and the interview's over. I have to like go do something else, you know. There were definitely days where I was like, what am I even literally actually doing, you know? Also like sending in local camera crews. I was adamant about having Juliana Forci on the show, but the only way I was going to be able to do that during the pandemic was to send a local camera crew into Chile, which is going through a pandemic just like we were. Like knowing that like, what if one of these people gets COVID? And it's essentially because of me, because I wanted this interview, you know?
Right. Also, you're giving them a livelihood, right? When other people
That's true.
aren't working.
I mean, I definitely have producers that were like, so like, this is money, like we're paying these people, like it's good. But, and also, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're just dealing with like, okay, is this worth it? Also like, are the stories gonna come across? This isn't a show about me. Are people gonna care? You know, one of the most beautiful episodes we did was the beef episode. You see these beautiful gaucho farmers that love their cows. Oh my God, you know, and they can't even, they can't hear vegan meat. They cannot even hear it, you know? It's like season 2, like the hunter-gatherer episode, you know? Like the hunter versus vegan, you know, we're talking about these there's not much as dichotomous as I eat meat or I don't eat meat. That is a conversation, you know? But when you're talking to these people that dignify the death of these animals the way that they do, it's very emotional, you know? And then you're speaking to a vegan butcher who's like, I'd literally rather die. I know, a vegan butcher, right? I know. I was like, there were a few interviews.
What are they butchering, the vegan butchers?
Honey, they're butchering wheat. I was like, that's bread. I'm like, this is bread. This is a bread roast. But, you know, okay. You know, it's like even me, I have to check myself, right? I also have to leave space. Like there was a funny little like a kind of producer thing where like I was not allowed to do any pre-interviews because they didn't want me to like learn too much because I get obsessed. Like, I mean, the things I can tell you, like, you could pick a thing. Cactus, okay, great. There's 119 varieties of cactus. They're all native to Mexico, with the exception of one, the snow cactus, that's native to South America. 7 million acres are of cactus in Mexico. 9 million are dedicated to commercial cactus. But many of you have probably never had cactus.
Why do you think you're like that? Do you think it's because as a black woman, you feel like you always have to work harder than someone else to prove yourself?
I do have to work harder, so I don't think I do.
You do.
I definitely do. But I think I am just obsessed. Like, I'll leave here and I'll watch a keynote on bacteria. You know what I mean? Like, I think nature is so cool. I love how much money all you guys are willing to spend on food. It was so silly. You know, people are willing to spend so much on a food experience and don't know shit about what's on their plate. I used to think it was funny. Then it made me sad, and now it makes me angry. Because we live in a country, I was talking to Padma Lakshmi, we're having a conversation, and so I was like, yeah, it's funny. She was like, that whole like apple pie thing, it's not one of those ingredients that are native to North America. Not one. Not butter, not flour, not apples, nothing, right? But corn is, you know? Most people don't know the true origin stories of corn, and now corn is a horrible commodity crop, and it's monocropped, and people have horrible things to say about corn. Corn is beautiful, you know? Corn is a really beautiful, beautiful ingredient. When colonizers first came here, or English settlers came here, they famously were kind of leaned on Native Americans. Like, what is this? We don't know how to use this. Yeah, we don't know how to use this, and it doesn't respond well to yeast. So you can't, as far as I'm concerned, I think food is how this whole entire place was able to be colonized. I don't think without the hospitality of Native Americans and the curiosity and necessity of colonizers, I don't think that it would even have been possible. I really think food is absolutely the genesis of that entire transaction. Because I definitely believe, it was an unfair transaction. We can call it theft. But, you know, or I call it theft. So when people say to me, like, that food or something isn't political, and I just think, like, look at the origin of this country. Are you insane? It's so political. It's so wrapped up in look at commodity crops. Look at what happens when there's a war. Look at shortages. You know, there's a war and suddenly you can't get your favorite white chocolate chip cookies from Subway. There's a reason for that. You know what I mean? But again, it's like when we're not informed on where things come from, right?
What do you think, during the pandemic, what I missed most was being with family and friends and like sharing a guacamole and dipping into the same bowl. Do you think there's anything, what have we learned from the pandemic? What do you think changed about food and eating during the pandemic? And what do you think is gonna stick around because of the pandemic?
I think more people are comfortable with cooking at home because of the pandemic, which is so lovely to me. It makes me happy. I think we are all much smarter consumers. People are very aware of what's on their plate. People are very aware of where things come from. People are very aware that, oh yeah, I live in New York. Avocados don't grow here. Okay? I tell people all the time, when's the last time you saw a pineapple at Union Square? Never, right? They don't grow here. I think people are more aware of labor, right? And I don't think that that's because of the pandemic. I think it's because we were like doing this on the pandemic, and we were forced to kind of pay attention and face ourselves and like look at what we were doing, you know, like look at yourself, look at ourselves, you know, and look at our behavior. I think that's great. I definitely mentally, like, it was great. I definitely had a career change. I ended up like being someone who makes food TV. That's cool. But I don't know, Joyce, like at my heart, like I really just like cooking for people, you know? So I miss that, and I hope I get to get that back. I'm really excited. For the first time in years, I'm doing pop-ups open to the public. I can finally do that again. You know, I can finally cook for you. I can cook for you, you know? I can cook for people, not just like, you know, do dinners for clients and things like that. I hope that people remain with the spirit of cooking at home. I love when someone asks me like nerdy, like baker's math stuff, who's like just a person. Like when a lawyer sends me a DM that's like, hey, so like sourdough. I'm like, yes. Just because you're a lawyer doesn't mean you can't make donuts, you know? Like,
well, you're doing a dinner party for your friends.
I am. I'm doing a dinner party on Friday.
I want to know what's on the menu.
There's a lot of things on the menu. We're doing like whatever. I went to the farmer's market today. I got these really beautiful, beautiful strawberries, and I was going to do a tart, but they were so juicy and good. I'm going to keep them raw. I'm going to make some ice cream. which really is just custards. I love making custards. Like I'm we're doing mussels. I'm gonna bake bread because like really I love making bread. If I could, I would just only make bread. But
everyone was making bread during the pandemic.
They were, and I'm thrilled. It's like the original food. Keep making bread. I'm thrilled. I guess like the thing that the second season of Counterspace really talks about is like the future and like we trauma bond. We were trauma bonding a lot. I think we still kind of do. But the pandemic was like a lot of trauma bonding. Like, my life sucks. Oh, me too. Like, I hope that we get some like joy bonding. And I think that's only possible with like a lot of gratitude. So I feel like a lot of us got a lot of gratitude out of the pandemic, and I hope that stays. I was talking before, like an addendum to like the Michael J. Fox quote, right? It's like, I think our gratitude needs to be diligent and a little bit disciplined. I think we need to be very disciplined because that's the only way to keep our optimism sustainable, It's just being very diligent and being very disciplined and even didactic. List, I'm grateful for you and you and you and you, being like that. I hope that remains because I feel like that, I never saw people more grateful to like touch me than when, you know what I mean? Than like the pandemic, like, is it over? I don't know, but like when it feels safe and you can finally do that, when you can finally hug your neighbor or hug your friends, we very much everybody in this room took that for granted, and I hope that doesn't, hope that we can keep that.
No, not anymore. I think we have all appreciated being apart and then coming back together, like tonight, right?
Yeah.
I think we have some questions also from the audience.
Oh, cute. Really? Oh,
yeah.
God.
I don't
I
don't have them in front of me, but like,
does anybody have a question?
Does anyone? I can come around.
Oh, I can't see. These lights are so
Oh,
bright.
look! Hi.
I can barely see.
What's your question?
Thank you.
Look at that.
You've got the floor.
Wow, so exciting. First of all, I want to thank you for, pointing out that food is political.
Yeah.
Like I'm Turkish, so if someone asks me like about baklava or like yogurt, I'm very like, yogurt is Turkish, don't. And if you say otherwise, I'm super offended. Like that's who I am.
Yeah.
And because I love yogurt so much, but.
Oh my God, I love this yogurt moment.
Yogurt's amazing. But my question for you, it's super simple, but like, what is something that you would make for someone? Like you're cooking for someone that you love, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what would you want to make them? Because I think that's like super special and important.
It is really special and important. I would make them some kind of like perpetual stew, some kind of, so the Native Americans and a lot of cultures in China actually have this dish. They never really let it get to the bottom. So there are some perpetual stews that have been going on for hundreds of years.
So it's a stew that started.
It started 300 years ago,
and then
they keep adding ingredients to it.
Have you ever had one of those?
I have had one of those.
Oh my God.
I've had tares like that. A tare
so
is
cool.
tare is like a dip. Sometimes it's used with ramen, and sometimes you see it being used with like skewered food, like yakitori, but like a tare that just constantly has like chicken dipped into it, and they never really let it get to the bottom, and it just got all those like flavors in it. And it's interesting. I would make that, or maybe like a rice dish, because rice is like said to be the most ancient grain, but every culture has a rice dish. Every single one. There's no culture that doesn't. So I think rice is really, really, really a very, very special grain. So maybe something rice related too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was the sweetest question.
I know. What the heck? I love that question.
I love that. Who else? Let's keep them coming. Any more questions?
It's fine if you don't. I'd said a lot.
Oh yeah, I know. This isn't a job interview, so you don't have to.
I said a lot.
I guess as a foodie, what's the craziest thing that you've ever eaten?
Ever made or ever eaten?
Both.
I had to make ice cream out of someone's breast milk. Mm-hmm.
Was that for one of your famous clients?
It was. And at first I was like, this is so, all you guys think this is gross, right? You guys are all like, that's disgusting. But you guys drink milk from a cow, from an oat, it's a human, you're a human. And it was for her and her kids. So it wasn't like she was selling it, And I break down whole animals. So like, I thought it was disgusting at first, and then I was like, wait a minute, like, this is a person I care about, I work with. I would rather do that than break down some animals. There are some animals that I don't love breaking down, especially like a whole animal. Like animal butchery can be pretty gnarly. I would rather make breast milk ice cream than like break down a cow, like a whole cow. Parts of a cow is one thing, but whoa, you know? And I did it. Delicious, because I can't serve anything I don't taste. Kids were happy. Client was happy. That's the craziest thing, dude. It's pretty crazy.
What does it taste? Is it a little bit sweet? What does it taste like?
Oh, no, it's delicious. Delicious ice cream. I mean, it was, again, ice cream, just custard.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like it's just like a really yummy custard that you just churn. And she wanted it for her kids. And if anything, I thought, creative. That's creative. She wanted a little ice cream. There were babies, you know, and it was, I mean, husband tried it. He liked it. He was a fan. I'm not in their bedroom. I don't care. I just pulled the ice cream. As long as she was making the milk, I was making the ice cream. But I have an NDA, so I can't tell you who, but they were famous. They're still very famous.
When is that NDA up?
Not for a while.
Oh, okay. We'll have you back for that one.
One day I'll write a book about that. But no, some of these people, some of the private clients have very, very, very interesting requests. They are the private clients are the ones that I've made the most strange. You know, like some of them are just like silly stuff. They like some people like their meat well done. They're like, that's the most delicious steak. I'm like, that was literally charred. But it's like, the thing is I realize I love making food for like you. You know what I mean? I don't like making like my food. I like making what you want so you're happy. You know, I'll make anything. My goal in life is like very much like taste it all. And I'm so thrilled that I get to taste things from different places and I'll try anything. People are like, I'll try anything once. I'll try anything a bunch of times. You know, like I wasn't always like that. I'm very much a product of like the wellness industry, or the wellness era, that I was like, oh, it's bad if you eat this. And I was like, oh shit, okay.
What do you think about TV shows that make eating certain dishes from other cultures a dare? You know, like I'm Filipino, so it's always like about the balut, the fertilized duck egg, and like, it was so disgusting.
I mean, then like, you have to remember, like, A, you don't yuck people's yums, but like, you're yucking a person. And like, I think about my friend Edvin, he's a chef, and this idea of like, how food should be. As an American, chicken should have a golden, crispy crust, right? And so in China, that's not necessarily true. Sometimes the meat looks gray, and sometimes it's boiled, and that's how they eat it. That is not disgusting. That is just a method. It's very easy for me to think like this because I'm a chef. I'm very process-driven, right? Sometimes braising is better. Sometimes there's a method. Sometimes there's a time. You're going to get a specific flavor. I think it's just really, you have to be mindful of like what you're saying is disgusting. You know? And you also have to be mindful of where things come from, right? Like black people and chicken. Talk about this one all the time, you know? Like that is true for a very devastating reason. This whole like, oh, black people love fried chicken. You know, when they were first brought here as enslaved people, the only animal they were allowed to own was a guinea hen. So like, you should feel like an asshole for making fun of someone because culturally, it's actually beautiful that still quintessentially certain types of chicken belong to the Black American community because at one point it was the only animal they were allowed to own. You know, when you think about the origin stories like a hoe cake or a Johnny cake, you know, that story's devastating. You know, enslaved folks were not given cooking utensils. They had to literally take farming tools and heat them over fire. And that's where the term hoe cake comes from because they had access to corn and water and they would cook it on a little hoe. The term Johnny cake is really just a mispronunciation by English settlers. They asked what these were. They said Shawnee cakes. They heard Johnny cakes. You know, it's like all of these stories, these narratives, you know. I know we want our origin stories to be fun and kind because food is fun and feels good. But the stories sometimes aren't. So if you're so quick to make fun of something or be like, ugh, that's gross, you got to think about where that comes from. Same with eating insects. Think about the narrative, where that comes from. 40 years ago, the oat milk thing, are you kidding? You know, a lot of this falls under like food trends as well. So for me, I nerd out on that. Like I'm like, what's the next one? Mushrooms were a thing. I firmly believe, mark me on this, seaweed's gonna be the next one. It's up 600%. You're gonna start seeing seaweed bacon. I swear to God, I don't know who's making it. It's not me, but it's gonna be a thing.
This is Forbes. Invest
I'm
in
telling you,
seaweed.
it's gonna be a huge thing. Kelp farming is a big, remember I told you about Bryn Smith I interviewed. Bryn Smith was the kelp farmer that I interviewed. We were in the middle of the ocean. Okay, he's a fisherman. Okay, can't swim and allergic to shellfish. I'm like, all right, well, anyway, so he's like, we're in the middle of the ocean. He pulls up this huge vertical farm of kelp, and it's got all these different species on it, stuff I've never even heard of as a cook. And I've really cooked some wild things. It's like a squirt fish and this fish. And I'm like, oh my God, these things taste delicious. Why don't you talk about them? And he's like, that's not my effing job. That's your job. You know, I was
You're
like,
the chef, you make it taste good.
thank you, Joyce. And it was one of the first times where I thought, oh my God, chefs, we have a very, very, very important responsibility, right? We need to talk more about regional food. We need to talk more about the foods that grow here, you know? It's like this whole thing, this tomatoes came all the way from Italy, Sardinia. It's like, what grows here? Because really delicious, incredible stuff grows here. And that's when we can lean on our past and our roots and indigenous communities, right? We can lean on the Sean Shermans who can teach us how to do incredible things with purslane, with weeds, you know? So I feel like I know that it's really easy to trauma bond, but I urge everybody to like lead with imagination, because that's what we're gonna need to fix a lot of these, like, yes, there's structural problems, but a lot of it is just like how everything is so siloed. We have to start understanding that like food insecurity, foster care reform, those things like aren't separate really. Hunger also belongs to like it's all tied under like this idea of like who gets what, right? Gentrification, you know what I mean? All of these conversations are kind of like all the same conversation, you know? So those are the things I'm like, let's think in the future, let's think solutions, you know?
Speaking of conversation, are there any more questions?
Sorry, I just told you, I'll just keep going.
I mean, I think we need a part two.
Part two.
Oh my gosh, I'm volunteering you for part two.
Oh my gosh,
okay.
you're so funny. Oh.
Any more questions? Because if not, we have a special treat. Did I miss one?
I love it.
Oh,
I can see you over there.
It'll be a quick one.
Don't worry, I'll make it
I'm
quick.
Curious to know what you think about like the Americanization of certain foods. Like, I know there's so many people in my circle who think Taco Bell is like a Mexican taco.
Yeah.
Like, I just want to know what you think of, you know, so many foods being Americanized, you know, quote unquote.
Ooh, God, ow. Okay, first off, that's not a quick question, but I'll make it a quick answer before I like, kill myself with this mic. So I think a lot of that comes down to access. It's really easy to just say, oh, that's shitty food, that's so bad for you. But if all you have money for is $1 hamburger from McDonald's, then honey, that's a gourmet meal, right? So I think it's what we're exposed to. I think it comes down to capitalism. So back before there was grocery stores, right? We lived in agrarian societies. You had relationships with your farmers. You knew how to cook because your mom made it a priority or your dad made it a priority to teach you how to cook, right? Then the capitalism, right? You gotta be work like crazy. You don't have time to learn how to make adobo from scratch. Don't worry, we have adobo here. We have this for you. We have a powder form of it. You can just use this instead. Now, I know you didn't ask for it, but now that you have it, you can work harder, right? So I feel like the idea of like Americanization, it's just a catch-all term for fast food, right? I think that I don't like when it comes from this place of like ignorance, like I don't want to try anything else. This is the thing I've been doing, you know, that non-adventurousness, you know, well, this is the taste I know, this is what I like, you know, but I do think that sometimes there are people who live in a situation who like don't have money and they only have $1 to their name, and unfortunately, like because of the way that food systems are set up, that food is designed to be cheap, right? It makes you sick because it's cheap. And the last thing I say is like you have to look who owns what. Like Bayer. Bayer is a pharmaceutical company, right? You know what they say, you create the bullet and the Band-Aid, right? So we have a pharmaceutical company that also, like Bayer Monsanto, that's like, I don't know, I don't love that. But that is the reality of our food systems, you know? So like, I feel like that's actually its own conversation, your question. That's like
It's the part two.
That's an episode.
That we talked about. Yeah.
We should make an episode about that.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to watch an episode now, the Chinatown episode.
I hope you like it.
Yes.
I really love this episode.
But I think I would love for everyone just to give a big round of applause for Sophia. Thank you so much. I probably let you talk on too much, but I love listening to you, so thank you.
I told you guys.
Thank you for having us. Now, and now the episode, season 2, episode 2, right?
Oh yeah, it's a good one.
The optimistic season.